Have you ever stopped to realize how much energy you spend trying to be someone? Not just any ordinary person, but someone special, someone important, someone that others recognize and admire. From a very young age, we have been taught that we need to build an identity, achieve accomplishments, accumulate titles, and prove our worth to the world. And so, we spend our entire lives carrying the weight of this mask, this persona we created, to protect ourselves from the terrifying feeling of being invisible, of being nobody. But what if I told you that it is precisely in this fear, in this resistance to accepting the possibility of being nobody, that the origin of almost all your suffering resides? What if true freedom, the kind that no one ever told you about, was hidden exactly in the opposite of everything you were taught to pursue? The beauty of being nobody is not about failure or giving up. It is about something much deeper, something that dissolves the invisible chains you didn't even know you were carrying. Alan Watts, the philosopher who dedicated his life to translating Eastern wisdom for the West, brought this uncomfortable and liberating truth to light. You don't need to be someone to be complete. In fact, the more you try to become someone, the further you drift away from your essence. The relentless pursuit of becoming something different from who you are at this very moment is like trying to escape your own shadow. You can run as much as you want, but it will always be there because it is part of you. Think for a moment about your entire journey up to this point. How many times have you felt pressured to prove your worth? In school, you needed to be the best student. At work, you need to be the most dedicated employee. On social media, you need to appear happy, successful, interesting. Even in your relationships, there is this silent pressure to be the ideal partner, the perfect friend, the exemplary child. And when you fail to meet these expectations, what happens? You feel inadequate, insufficient, as if you are failing some cosmic test that everyone else seems to pass with ease. But here's the truth that no one told you. This test does not exist. You are competing in an invented game, chasing imaginary prizes, trying to impress judges who are also lost in the same illusion. The freedom that no one told you about begins when you finally see this mechanism and decide to stop feeding it. Being nobody does not mean erasing your personality or abandoning your responsibilities. It means letting go of the compulsive need to prove something, to be recognized, to leave a permanent mark on the world as if your existence depended on it. Alan Watts used to say that the ego is like a social fiction, a story we tell about ourselves and end up believing to be real. You are not really the collection of titles, accomplishments, and roles you play. Those are just temporary clothes you wear while traversing this experience called life. But somewhere along the way, you confuse the clothes with who you really are. And now you live terrified of losing those clothes, of being naked in front of the world, of being exposed as nobody. But this nakedness, this vulnerability of being nobody, is precisely where authenticity resides. When you are no longer performing, no longer trying to impress or protect an image, you can finally breathe. You can simply exist without the hidden agenda of becoming something different. And in that space of not being anyone special, something extraordinary happens. You discover that you are already complete, that you always have been, that you never needed any external achievement to validate your existence. The beauty of being nobody is that you stop carrying the impossible burden of sustaining a fixed identity in a world that is constantly changing. Observe nature for a moment. The tree is not trying to be a better tree. The river does not worry about being more impressive than other rivers. The mountain does not lose sleep thinking about its reputation. They simply are, expressing their nature effortlessly, without anxiety, without that neurotic need to prove themselves. And yet, there is undeniable beauty in that, a dignity that comes from the absence of pretense. You can also live like this, not because you should copy nature, but because you are nature. That separation you feel, that sense of being isolated inside your head looking at the world from the outside, is just another story you tell yourself. The freedom that no one told you about is realizing that you are not separate from the life happening around you. You are life itself expressing itself through this specific temporary form that we call your name. And when this perception truly settles in, not just as an intellectual concept, but as a lived experience, the need to be someone special simply dissolves. But the ego is cunning. It hears these words and immediately tries to turn them into yet another self-improvement project. Great, it says. Now I will become someone who is free from the need to be someone. I will be the best at being nobody. And so, you return to the same cycle, using different words but maintaining the same pattern. The beauty of being nobody is not something you achieve or conquer. It is not another goal to be added to your list of objectives. It is simply what remains when you stop fleeing from the present moment, when you stop resisting what is, when you finally relax and allow life to flow through you without all that mental interference. Alan Watts called this the effortless way, not because it is easy, but because it involves stopping the effort to be something different from what you already are. If you feel that these words resonate with something inside you, that there is a truth here that your heart recognizes even if your mind still resists, be part of this awakening journey. Subscribe to the channel to continue exploring these ideas that can completely transform your relationship with life. Leave a like if you are tired of carrying the weight of trying to be someone special. And in the comments, tell us which city you are watching this from, because this message about the freedom that no one told you needs to reach people everywhere who are still trapped in the illusion that they need to be more than they already are. Modern society has built an entire structure based on the idea that you need to become someone. The educational system trains you to compete, to stand out, to accumulate credentials that prove your worth. The corporate world pushes you to climb hierarchical ladders, to conquer positions of power, to have your name recognized. The culture of social media encourages you to cultivate a personal brand, to turn your life into a constant spectacle, to measure your success in likes, followers, and external validation. And in all this process, something essential is lost: the ability to simply be here now without needing to prove anything to anyone. The beauty of being nobody is that you become invisible to this whole game, not because you hid, but because you stopped playing. And when you stop playing, you discover that you never needed that in the first place. The freedom that no one told you about is that your inner peace does not depend on external achievements, public recognition, or the accumulation of impressive experiences. It is available now, in this moment, if you stop looking for it in the future or in some altered state of your identity. Alan Watts often told a story about a man who spent his entire life climbing a mountain, convinced that at the top he would find happiness, fulfillment, the meaning of life. And when he finally reached the summit, exhausted and aged, he discovered that there was nothing there but wind and stones. But then looking down, he realized something extraordinary. The entire journey, every step, every effort, every moment he had dismissed as a means to an end was the very meaning. He didn't need to get anywhere. Life was happening all the time, and he was so focused on being someone in the future that he missed the opportunity to simply be in the present. This story perfectly illustrates the trap we all fall into. We are so conditioned to live for the next moment, for the next achievement, for the improved version of ourselves that we are trying to build, that we completely forget to inhabit the only moment that truly exists. This one here. And being nobody is precisely that. It is stopping the flight to the imaginary future and finally being present in the life that is happening now. But let's be honest about what this really means, because there is a lot of confusion around these ideas. Being nobody is not about becoming passive, giving up on your dreams, or abandoning any ambition. It is not about becoming a hermit isolated from society or adopting a stance of cynical indifference toward life. The beauty of being nobody is much more subtle and profound than that. It's about doing what you do without carrying the additional weight of self-importance, without turning every action into yet another proof of your worth. You can work, create, contribute, love, build things in the world, all of this without the neurotic need for these actions to make you someone special. The difference is that when you act from that place of being nobody, there is a lightness, a spontaneity, a creativity that simply does not exist when you are doing things to feed your identity. Alan Watts called this action without an actor, doing things without that heavy and contracted sense of I at the center of everything. And in that state, paradoxically, you become much more effective, much more present, much more alive. Think of small children for a moment. They have not yet fully developed that sense of being someone who needs to protect and prove themselves. A child playing is completely absorbed in the activity. There is a wholeness to it, a complete integration between what they are doing and who they are being. They are not thinking, I need to play well to prove that I am a good child. They simply play. And there's an undeniable beauty in that innocence, in that absence of heavy self-consciousness. Of course, we cannot go back to being children, and it would not be desirable anyway. but we can reclaim that quality of presence, that ability to be fully here without all the baggage of the ego. The freedom that no one told you about is that you can live as a responsible adult, deal with all the complexities of modern life, and still maintain that essential quality of being nobody special, of simply being an expression of life happening. It is not about regressing, it is about integrating maturity with presence, responsibility with lightness. Western culture has a particular obsession with the idea of being someone because our dominant philosophy places the individual at the center of everything. You are taught from an early age that you are a separate, isolated agent who needs to fight to make your place in the world, who needs to defend against external threats, who needs to accumulate resources and status to ensure your survival and happiness. And it's not that this perspective is completely false, it has its practical utility in certain contexts. The problem is when it becomes the only lens through which you see reality, because this view creates a chronic sense of separation, of inadequacy, of never being enough. You are always comparing, always competing, always measuring your progress against some imaginary standard, and that is exhausting. The beauty of being nobody offers a radical relief from that perspective. Not denying that you exist as an individual, but placing that in a much broader context where you are simultaneously an individual drop and the entire ocean. Alan Watts loved to use this metaphor. Each wave in the ocean is unique, has its own shape and movement, but is never really separate from the ocean. You are like that too. When you begin to live from this understanding, something fundamental shifts in the quality of your experience. Fear diminishes because you are no longer defending a fragile identity that needs to be constantly protected and validated. Anxiety about the future decreases because you are no longer betting all your happiness on becoming someone different from who you are now. Envy and resentment lessen because you are no longer comparing your journey with others, trying to measure who is more of someone. And in place of that, there is an openness, a curiosity, a willingness to meet life as it is instead of how you think it should be. The freedom that no one told you about is not about achieving something new. It is about letting go of something old. It is about unloading that heavy burden of being someone special that you didn't even realize you were carrying until you started to let it go. And when you let go, even if just for a moment, there is relief. There is a fascinating paradox at the heart of this understanding about the beauty of being nobody. The more you try to become nobody as a project, as yet another identity to be achieved, the more you remain trapped in the cycle of trying to be someone. It is the ego trying to appropriate even your own dissolution, turning being nobody into yet another spiritual achievement, another thing to add to your internal resume. Look at me, I'm so evolved that I've transcended the need to be someone. And so you return to square one, just with more sophisticated language. Alan Watts was very aware of this trap and often warned about it. The freedom that no one told you about does not come from effort, from intensive practice, from following some specific method, although all these things may have their place. It comes from something much simpler and at the same time much harder. Seeing clearly the game you are playing and simply stopping. Not stopping living, not stopping acting, but stopping adding that extra layer of self-importance, that constant internal commentary about how you are doing, about what this says about who you are. The mind fiercely resists this because it has been trained to always be doing something, always progressing, always moving towards some goal. The idea that you are already complete, that there is nothing to achieve, that the beauty of being nobody is available now without any additional preparation is almost impossible for the mind to accept. But what about my personal growth? What about my development journey? What about my life goals? The mind has 1,000 objections because accepting this would mean the death of its entire project, of its entire narrative about going somewhere. And in a sense, that is exactly what needs to happen. Not literal death, of course, but the death of that identification with the story you tell about yourself, with that need to constantly be becoming something different. Alan Watts called this the death of the ego, but not in the sense that the ego completely disappears and you are left without personality or unable to function. What dies is the identification with the ego as being who you really are, the belief that your personal identity is the most important thing in the universe that needs to be defended at all costs. Living from the beauty of being nobody does not mean you stop having preferences, opinions, or desires. You still like certain things and dislike others. You still make decisions and act in the world. You still have relationships and responsibilities. The difference is that all of this happens with much less weight, much less drama, much less sense that your entire identity is at stake in every situation. When someone criticizes you, you can hear the feedback without collapsing because you are not defending a fragile image of yourself. When something doesn't go as planned, you can adapt without feeling that you have failed as a person. When you achieve something, you can appreciate it without turning it into more fuel for the ego. There is a fluidity to this, a capacity to respond to life without getting stuck in rigid patterns of, I am this way or I need to be that way. The freedom that no one told you about is essentially the freedom to be flexible, to not be tied to a fixed identity that needs to be maintained at all costs. And in that flexibility, you discover a creativity and a vitality that simply are not available when you are contracted around protecting who you think you are. Alan Watts often used music as a metaphor for this way of living. When you listen to music, you are not trying to get to the end of the song as quickly as possible. You are not anxious for it to finish so you can check another song off your list. You are simply present with the sounds as they unfold, appreciating each note, each pause, each movement of the melody. The music is not going anywhere, it is simply an expression happening in time. And life is exactly like that. You are not going anywhere. There is no destination where you will finally be someone enough and can relax. Life is now, this moment, this breath, this experience exactly as it is. And the beauty of being nobody is that you can finally stop treating life as a means to some end and start living it as the end itself. Each moment ceases to be a step to the next and becomes complete in itself. And in that completeness, in that fullness of now, you discover something that all your efforts to be someone special could never give you. Genuine peace, not as the absence of challenges or difficulties, but as a deep acceptance of what is. So where does that leave you? You just heard a lot of words about the beauty of being nobody and about the freedom that nobody told you. But what now? What do you do with this? And this is precisely the wrong question because it implies that you need to do something to turn this into yet another self-improvement project. The real answer is simple and deeply disappointing for the mind that wants a map, a method, an action plan. You simply observe. You observe how your mind is constantly trying to be someone, how it is always comparing, always measuring, always worrying about what others think. You observe this not to change, not to get rid of it, but simply to see clearly what is happening. And in that clear observation, without judgment, without trying to fix anything, something begins to loosen naturally, not because you did something right, but because awareness itself is transformative. When you truly see a pattern, when you see it completely without stories about it, it begins to lose its power over you. The beauty of being nobody is not something you achieve. It is something that is revealed when you stop trying to achieve anything. And if these words touch something deep within you, if you feel that there is a truth here that goes beyond words, share this message by subscribing to the channel so that more people can discover the freedom that nobody told you about. Leave your like if you are ready to let go of the burden of trying to be someone special and finally rest in the simplicity of being nobody. And in the comments, tell us from which city you are watching us, because this understanding of the beauty of being nobody needs to spread all over the world, reaching every person who is still trapped in the trap of thinking they need to be more than they already are. You don't need anything more. You are already whole. You always have been. And this is the most radical freedom that exists.